Welcome to Missing Persons Case Files, a place where the gone are not the forgotten. What's happening in the forests of North America? How are so many people disappearing only to have their remains found much later, or in many cases, not at all? Are the predators to blame? Giant hair-covered beasts? Or even more terrifying, us as humans? Maybe it's both. Maybe it's neither. These are just a few of the questions we'll look to uncover here on the Missing Persons Case Files.
Keith Parkins, a 2-year-old boy from Ritter, Oregon, went missing in the afternoon hours on April 10th of 1952. The family was visiting the grandparents as a new calf had been born, and Keith and his brothers wanted to see it. They were at the barn. His brothers, Michael was 5 and Terry was 6. They were all playing and looking at the calf when their mom came out and caught him for lunch. His 2 brothers ran ahead of him, and their mom noticed that Keith wasn't with them. They went back to look, and Keith was nowhere to be found. And the brothers said that he went out the barn door and around the long side of the barn. So they went and looked around there, but he wasn't anywhere. So then the search began, looking for little Keith Parkins. 150 people all lined up with distance between them, but still to where they could hear each other speak. That evening, now you got to think, when the mom called the boys in for lunch, it was noon. So that evening, about 3 miles from the barn, they found a few of his footprints in with some other cows before they disappeared. The search continued throughout the night. Now listen to this. This is crazy. There are so many things about this case that will make you scratch your head, because you have to keep in mind the topography in the 1950s. This area is going to be completely different today as it was in the 50s. It's not going to be the same at all. So the searchers crossed at least one icy creek. They had to go through barbed wire fences and 2 mountain ranges. Okay. How can a 2-year-old go over an icy creek through barbed wire fences and 2 mountain ranges? At this point, it would have been dark. Even with the full moon, there wouldn't have been enough light for this little boy to see. They found him 19 hours later, around 7 in the morning. And it's stated that he went 9 miles as the crow flies. Well, 9 miles as the crow flies is a straight line. You're not going to go in a straight line from the barn that he left from to where he was found. In all actuality, it is 12 miles from his grandparents' house. So when he was located, he was face down. He had his coat and his hat laying beside him. So it was another searcher who had found him and called the dad over, and the dad came running and snatched him up as any parent would, thankful to see them, but he really thought that he had passed away by this time because his body was stiff, he was cold, he had his eyes closed. But then he found out that little Keith Parkins, at 2 years old, had made this massive journey and he was still alive. So he rushed him back. The state police officer met them with a private plane. They took him to the hospital. And after being there for a few hours, he did regain consciousness. And the only injury that this little boy had, this could have ended tragically, because it's sub-freezing temperatures at this point. April 10th is right around Easter. So it's still cold. There's still snow on the ground where they were. It could have ended tragically. But the only injuries that this little boy sustained were scratches on his face. His clothes were torn and ripped, no doubt from the barbed wire fences that he had to climb through. This is a resilient little boy. So when they asked him what happened, the only thing he could say was, or remember, was that a cat scratched him. He didn't remember anything that happened. And in doing the research in this case, I'd actually run across a podcast. Well, there were several podcasts that had done this case, but this one in particular had said that an interview was done with him when he was in his 60s, and I wish I could find it. He had his clothes that he had on that day, and it was a light jacket with a hat that had the little earmuffs that were attached to the hat that just came over your ears. And that's really the only thing he had on to keep him warm. I mean, it wasn't anything substantial to keep him alive in sub-freezing temperatures. But he couldn't remember, even to the time that they did that interview, what happened. He had no recollection of any of it. So when you look at all the pieces of this case, he goes missing in the afternoon. He has trekked this long way, then it's nighttime and it gets colder and colder. I mean, no doubt he could have, started suffering symptoms of exposure. When you're hypothermic, you start to take off your clothes because you feel like you're too hot. Was that the case? I'm not 100% sure. I'm not too naive to jump on the Bigfoot bandwagon at this point in the case, because when I was looking over it, there's different things that could have happened. We can't automatically assume that a Bigfoot had taken him off for many reasons. There were no footprints outside of his found 3 miles from the barn, but after that, it was nothing. There were no footprints. There were no animal tracks either. So I looked into a couple of the theories. I'm thinking it was one of the deputies who had said that a bird had to have carried him. Comical? Yes, it's comical, but is it plausible? It absolutely is. So I started looking into birds that would be in that area of Ritter, Oregon in the 1950s. There were several, but only one made sense, and that, of course, is the bald eagle. But still, I mean, picking a child up and carrying them for that length would be pretty hard on the bird, that I would think. Now, in the 1950s, the population of bald eagles were incredibly low. So in the 1800s, there were an estimated 400,000, okay? But by the 1950s, there were less than 500 pairs of eagles. So seeing one would be on the rare side. Plus, they have, they're dealing with habitat loss. They're dealing with, encroachment, chemicals. There's just so many things that factor into the eagle population being low, and why it would be considered rare to see one at that point in the 1950s. So then, with Keith having made mention that a cat scratched him, it was not indicated what kind of cat. We can only speculate here in this search of this case. But I did go ahead and look to see what cats, large cats, wild cats, were in Ritter, Oregon in the 1950s. And I came across, of course, the cougar, bobcats, and then the lynx. Now, the lynx that I found in that case, they were in Oregon, but not in that specific area. So I canceled those out right away. So you have the bobcat, which is twice the size of a domesticated cat, but in the eyes of a 2-year-old, it would just be a really big cat, really big house cat is how I would think that they would see that. The cougar, would a cougar really pick up a child and carry it? Of course, you have to factor that in. A cat will pick them up and carry them off somewhere. It was theorized that maybe the cat had picked up the boy and was carrying it off to its den to eat. Trying to cut down on the graphic here. And the searchers kept pushing the cat and pushing the cat and pushing the cat. And so he finally let the boy go. And the boy went on about his way, lost, dark, scared, no doubt, hungry, freezing cold. You do have to factor in the large cat here. But again, it stops you because there were no animal tracks. It is almost like this little boy made it 3 miles from the barn where he went missing. And then all of a sudden, he was transported to where he was found because they didn't find any other prints from what I found in my research. Les Stroud actually tried to reenact this whole trek that Keith would have had to have taken. And you guys know Les Stroud. I mean, he's the survivor man, out in the woods all the time. He does this for a living. He teaches people this. So he takes this same trek that Keith would have had to have taken, and he struggled doing this. He said, he's got a short little video, if you look it up online, of it's like 1 minute and 45 seconds of him talking about this case. And he said, there is no way that a 2-year-old would be able to do this trek alone in the snow at night with no light, because he was doing this trek on just normal ground. I mean, there was no snow, and at night he had a full moon, but he didn't have enough light to actually be able to see. So I don't know. I don't know where I am as far as this case goes, simply because there were no tracks found. I don't really want to get on the Bigfoot bandwagon, but in this case, you have to factor everything in. Everything has to be looked at. Every, stone has to be turned over. And the fact that even to this day, or when that interview took place when he was in his 60s, and he still had no idea what happened. Like, if you interview a kid at 2 years old, like I have a 2.5-year-old grandson, if something happened to him the day before and I asked him about it the day after, he would pretty much, not even the whole day. It was 19 hours. He would be able to say, Nana, this happened or whatever. But this little boy had no recollection whatsoever at all. The only thing that he said is a cat scratched him. Now, like I said, the scratches on his face and his clothes being torn. I mean, I'm thinking barbed wire fence there. But if he did happen to have a run-in with a cat, it could equate to scratches on his face and his clothes being torn. But he has no recollection whatsoever, even to this day. Now, this was 72 years ago. So it will forever remain a mystery as to what really happened and what led him to go into the woods in the first place. And that's when I wrote down, when to go. What if he was by the barn? His brothers had went on, he's by himself at the barn, and he hears somebody who sounds familiar in the woodline. Is it something as complex as something being in the woods in Ritter, Oregon, like a Wendigo, mimicking the voice of someone familiar to him, maybe his mom. Maybe he just went out and he got turned around and thought he was going the right way and he had no one to guide him. There's so many what ifs in this case. And again, without knowing exactly what happened to him and him not remembering what happened to him, I mean, it was an absolute miracle straight from the hand of God that this little 2-year-old boy did not pass away that day from hypothermia and the elements of the land. And it is really, really fascinating case for a little boy to make it 12 miles over frozen ponds and 2 mountain ranges and crawling through barbed wire fences. I mean, that is a tough kid. If this is, truly what happened, and he had no one with him, he wasn't abducted. I really don't know where to go with it. I would really love to hear your opinions on this case. If you would like to leave them in the comments below, I would be fascinated to see what others' opinions on this case are. So at that, we're going to cut this off and absolutely leave me what it is that you think happened. Or if you're familiar with this case and know more than I do about it, please let me know, because this was really intriguing for me to research. And I did a lot of research on this case, and I'm at a loss as to what happened because of the lack of footprints. It really is like he just walked from that cow enclosure 3 miles away and went through a portal and ended up where he was found. I mean, I have nothing. So please let me know your thoughts on this. I would love to hear them. And until the next one, we will talk to you